Pronto, agora estamos no YouTube também. Dê um oi pro YouTube aí. Quem tiver aí, não sei se é alguém ainda, mas enfim. Vamos continuar assistindo Why Do You Remember Liminal Spaces? Foi esse, deixa eu só confirmar se foi esse vídeo aqui. É, calma aí. Só confirmar aqui. É, tá. Só ver se tá certo isso aqui. Oh, merda, né? Aqui. Tá, deixa eu acessar seu canal aqui. Pera, mas é esse vídeo aqui mesmo? Eu achei esse vídeo aqui só. Ele só mudou o título. Antes era Liminal Spaces, The Fear of Forgetting. Que é Liminal Spaces, o medo de se esquecer. Agora ele mudou o título aparentemente, o cresendex, né? Esse vídeo aqui. Que é Por que você se lembra de Liminal Spaces? A gente tava em 23 e 35 por aí. Mas enfim, vamos voltar pra aqui, tá bom? Enfim, é isso. Vamos. Opa. Eu vou só colocar aqui. Deixa eu ver. Tá bom, perfeito. Vamos lá. 3, 2, 1 e dá.
That look similar all around the world. We seem to be blurring thousands of childhood memories together to come up with a
Por pra traduzir sozinho.
picture that might look something like this in our heads. So when we then see that image on screen, we freak out because yeah, that's the
Freaky.
one. In this way, we all seem to have a hive mind of nostalgia. The face of nostalgia has changed.
Caralho.
Childhood was a long time ago. How could you remember
Ah, mas é porque essa mente coletiva de nostalgia é porque meio que a maioria das pessoas, tipo, é que porque geralmente são bagulhos que a maioria, tipo, a maioria das vezes o livro da Space ele não é um bagulho específico, ele retrata tipo, ideias de coisas que que a maioria das pessoas quando era pequena viu, por exemplo. Depende, tipo, geralmente ou remete a tempos antigos que não necessariamente você viveu, mas você escutou da TV, enfim, tipo anos 80 que são toda aquela estética, tipo assim, por exemplo, né, na tela, que nem tá na tela essa imagem. Tipo, às vezes não é nem por você ter uma mente compartilhada, mas é porque, tipo assim, você mostra uma imagem dos anos 80 característica, tipo, com algumas coisas que teve, tipo, praticamente para todas as pessoas dos anos 80, aquilo vai se tornar nostálgico, mesmo que você não tenha vivido, porque você já viu aquilo em muitas coisas sobre os anos 80, sobre aquela estética dos 80, entendeu?
every
Que é o que tá associado na tua cabeça, tá ligado? Tipo, isso daqui é algo associado com os anos 80.
detail, everything you did? The answer is you can't. So you end up relating to a childhood that nobody really had, but everyone thinks they had. Why is all of our childhood nostalgia so
Também.
similar? It's like those videos you sometimes see of things we all did as kids. Oh, we all used to pour shots in our bottle caps and drink them, or attempt to catch the fridge light turning off. I never was able to do that. Anyway, how come we've all done these seemingly very specific things? Going to the comment section of these videos, you'll find a good number of people genuinely confused as to how we all practically lived the same childhood.
Mas que são coisas comuns, né, de uma criança se indagar e fazer.
Liminality is really just a version of this in physical space.
É.
Of course, we haven't all been to this wooden park. We are grouping together memories of older times and making them so non-specific that we get nostalgic for places we never even knew. A childhood home is yours. It's exclusive to you. But the faded memories of playgrounds, school hallways, or wooden parks isn't exclusive to anyone. These are not your memories. These are everyone's memories. We can go even further than just space. Anemoia, as defined by the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows, refers to a nostalgia for a time you've never known. I didn't grow up in the 90s, yet the aesthetics of that time still fit well into the nostalgic liminal space.
Imagina do
Despite
Never Gonna Give You
seemingly
Up,
not
do Rick and
appealing
Roll.
to everyone, yet even for
Cine.
people like me who didn't grow
Nossa,
up in
ideia
these
é muito.
times, the feeling of liminality is still present in an image depicting the 90s, the 80s, and even the 60s. It makes you wonder what people from other...
Só um segundo, gente. Deixa eu só ver um bagulho aqui. Aqui. Calma aí. Ah, tá. Tá. Tá.
time
Não, tá
periods we
certo.
consider
Vamos lá.
liminal spaces. An old, decayed 1860 saloon.
Nossa, mas é muito bagulho
night,
de sei lá,
just
como
a
assim.
decrepit building from a bygone era for us might just have been an altered reality
Velho,
for
esses
someone who
anos,
grew up
hein?
in the days of the old American frontier. Liminal space images with dates on
Isso é
them are
mais.
also particularly nostalgic. Not only do they depict a time long in the past, they
É
also
porque o
directly
bagulho de
tell you.
data no canto da foto
There's
lembra
something
a câmera
different
antiga,
about
né?
these images, knowing they're from 2002, like a piece
Pela
of
começo das
history not
câmeras,
meant to be
valorização das
touched.
câmeras
They
digital
can
que
also
tira foto e
contribute to an
aparece
uncanny feeling by
bagulho.
being set in the future, like we're seeing times we shouldn't. Despite all this
Não
nostalgia, though,
necessariamente.
liminal spaces don't come without a
Eu acho
certain
que esses números dá um desconforto a mais, dá. Mas eu acho que seja por essa explicação que ele. Sei lá, tipo uma found footage me passa mais sensação
or at the
de
very
algo
least
que
discomfort.
tenebroso.
This isn't true for all
Nossa,
images without a
essa
certain
foto aqui é
fear,
muito zica,
or
tá?
at the very
Essa aqui ia ser mais. Ela pega bastante isso aqui. Dá, sei lá, um cinema estranho.
least discomfort. This isn't true for all images.
Esse aqui também. Só que esse aqui me lembra o álbum do Arctic Monkeys, do Tranquility Base Hotel em Cassino. Nada a ver, né? Mas me lembra.
Some liminal spaces
Sei lá, um bagulho que na minha cabeça teria. Na
can be very
Tranquility
comforting.
Base Hotel em
Pool
Cassino.
rooms are an example of what most people would call a comforting liminal space, created by
Nossa, não
a
acho nem confortando nem a
pool rooms
fuder, né?
appear relaxing. I can relate to these images
Nunca.
so much so that I feel comfort inside of them. I feel as though I can place myself in here. I can feel the lukewarm water, the sounds of splashing as I slowly move through it, the smooth tiles contrasting with the more coarse in-betweens under my feet. Unlike most liminal spaces, when I place myself in this image, I feel nothing but calm. Feels like I can lay down on that familiar tiling and just become one with the space itself. This place is undoubtedly a liminal space, but it's one that you dwell in.
Leal.
Here, I would like to make the distinction between dwelling and active survival. We dwell in our homes, we dwell at work, we dwell in places that are familiar, that pose no threats. And similarly, I would dwell in a place like this, as long as there were no entities or anything
Tá maluco, cara.
scary. This cannot be said about the majority of liminal space images. For every comforting place of dwelling, there's a place of active survival. An impending doom feeling some of
This
these
my
images can
rule, esse
convey.
tenebroso, hein?
What these scary liminal spaces can do is take something familiar
Esse
to
legalzinho.
you and put them in an unfamiliar, scary context. This feeling has often been called the uncanny.
Nossa, mas tem um
and these
bagulho.
images can be
Terror.
palpably
É que que nem eu falei, não lembro se foi no último vídeo, enfim.
The term
O Uncanny Valley, o Liminal Space é tipo o Uncanny Valley, só que é dos lugares, né?
comes from the German
Porque ele tá quase muito perto de ser tipo um lugar que existiria, mas aquela faltinha que tem pra ele ser um lugar que realmente existiria, faz com que ele seja completamente esquisito.
word unheimlich, which literally translates to unhomely. In other words, unfamiliar. It was first introduced by German psychiatrist Ernst Jentsch, and later elaborated on by Sigmund Freud in his 1919 essay titled The Uncanny. The strange thing about the word unheimlich is that it not only means not of home, but also can be used in certain circumstances to describe something hidden within the home that was never meant to come to light. This is contradictory, and would suggest that the meaning of the words unheimlich, uncanny, and heimlich, canny, overlap. And if unheimlich is unfamiliar, then naturally heimlich would mean familiar. We can then assume that the uncanny is not solely defined by the unsettling nature of unfamiliarity, but also familiar things becoming unfamiliar. This is also in line with the second definition of unheimlich as being something from within the home that was never meant to come to light. Look at an image of a more creepy, or in this case, uncanny liminal space. We are in a familiar environment, and that for a period of time we would be in nearly every day during the morning and afternoon, looked at through the lens of unfamiliarity. We see this place we're used to seeing during the day at night, something within the boundaries of what we would call familiar that was never meant to be seen by us is coming to light. The secondary definition of unheimlich. In other words, the familiar is becoming unfamiliar. We make the childish and unconscious assumption that if a thing has consistently been found to possess a certain quality, even if that quality should be lost at any later date, it must have that quality forever and can always have it. If we dwell in a classroom during the day enough, we start to make a mental model of what these places should look like. We seem to save these memories of that place into a snapshot of what we know. And reality is a video that is constantly changing. This is all to say that we compare that snapshot of a familiar environment to that same environment in an unfamiliar context.
Mas tipo, LIMINAL SPACES que nem esse, não que nem aqueles lá que é muito surreal, que é bem real, só tipo 100 pessoas. Quanto mais escuro, geralmente mais assustador. Mas isso é mais nostálgico pra mim.
But this seems obvious. We consciously understand that a classroom undergoes the same changes of night and day as anything else would. Yet we seem to always be shocked when these changes are laid out for us. Freud thought that nobody was truly free from their childish views of the world. Sure, as we grow older, we adopt new beliefs and generally prefer to reject the ones we made in our adolescent minds. As children, we might be tempted in believing that these places stay the same as when we first see them, that the qualities of our first impressions of these places stick around forever. But our rational, more grown-up brains know this is obviously not true. While we consciously understand that this emptiness in a different time of day is to be expected, to a more childish part of us, we see this as wrong, as a threat to what we believe in. But these thoughts are buried so deep that we are only left with a subtle feeling of discomfort. To quote Freud himself, "Nowadays we no longer believe in them," in reference to our old ways of thinking. We have surmounted such ways of thought, but we do not feel quite sure of our new set of beliefs, and the old ones still exist within us, ready to seize upon any confirmation. I feel like liminal space images are this subtle confirmation that our primitive ways of thinking are all still within us. Why are we unsettled by a grocery store at night? A phenomenon that is entirely explainable using the logic we know now and isn't at all mysterious. Probably because as children we would not think this situation was even possible. This could be one reason the themes of ignorance in childhood are so prevalent in creepy liminal spaces and in the horror genre.
Parece bagulho do Super Mario 64.
We're much more prone to fall for these tricks, and we do not have an easy explanation
O salão não precisava nele nos quadros.
Liminal spaces are a look back into that time, and a chance for that small percentage of us that still operates on that childlike way of thinking to once again be used to determine the world. This all falls apart, however, when one decides to put a monster somewhere. Some active threat that even our rational brains are afraid of. I don't consider these places that feature an entity a liminal space, because instead of asking the questions, why is nobody here?
É porque o Liminal Space, quando ele é pra dar medo, no máximo ele é pra dar medo pelo desconhecido. Se bota alguma coisa que tu conhece, que é... Conhece é meio paia. Nossa senhora, mas eu que o Skinwalker, cara. Esse jogo é Slender mesmo cidade, não é? Eu joguei esse jogo muito tempo atrás, muito tempo atrás. É meio engraçado. Não é muito assustador, não.
but instead very fearful for a reason that is obvious. It is the feeling of terror that I find a lot more fascinating than the feeling of horror, and one that liminal spaces exemplify. Terror is the feeling of dread and anticipation that comes before the horrifying experience. Liminal spaces are the embodiment of terror. However, liminal spaces are eternal. We are in a constant state of terror looking at a liminal space photograph. But
Não
unlike a
sei,
film
depende
or
da
a video
fotografia, eu acho.
game, this terror is never followed up by anything. When we look at these images, we metaphorically brace for impact. Yet there's never any horror present, simply the dread and anticipation of something, anything happening. But nothing ever happens. You're confused as to why you even feel this way. What's wrong with this place? It's just a gas station, just a hallway. What about this is so terrifying that I expect something to jump out at me? In fact, I want something to jump out at me, just to give me a justification for my
Que é
fears.
isso?
But it never comes. Just a perpetual state of anticipation. And it's why I think the backrooms are such a terrifying idea. For those who don't know, I'll try to summarize the concept of the backrooms briefly. The backrooms
Mas
are
que cagaram meio quando começaram a botar muito bicho.
originated
Quando
from 4chan
começaram a
posts,
botar bicho e daí quando começaram a fazer
all
muito
mono
bicho.
yellow with buzzing fluorescent lighting. Just that raw idea of being put in a place completely foreign yet somewhat familiar. Repeating hallways that go on for eternity, the buzzing of old fluorescent lighting. You would think that something would try to chase you, or you're in some sort of danger. But in the back rooms, at least in the original concept, nothing is present. The only horror is the human brain driving itself crazy in the madness of mono yellow. But of course, now that the backrooms have gotten popular, people have added new levels to it and a bunch of lore, including new entities, which is cool, I guess. I've already talked on how I feel about the original concept of the backrooms versus the new version, so I won't go in too deep. The concept of a monster/entity being present is alluded to in the original post, but never truly stated. I personally think this only adds to the paranoia that something might be here, rather than an actual threat being present. But much like scary liminal space images, you are in a perpetual
Quando
state
deixa
of
frito até o talo,
anxiety and
botou.
anticipation
Tu
in
não
the
fica frito, tu
backrooms.
só fica
It is pure
com
terror. As Christopher Isherwood
vontade de
once
não
said,
ser visto.
horror is
Tu fica,
always aware of its cause. Terror never
tipo, num
is.
você fica.
That is precisely what
Não
makes
sei.
terror terrifying. Liminal space.
O horror é sempre estar sempre com medo, tipo, consciente da sua causa. O terror é nunca estar. Isso é precisamente o que faz o terror aterrorizante.
Makes terror terrifying.
É, tipo,
Liminal spaces are also a weird temporal phenomenon.
botaram coisa nas backgrounds, tiraram o terror e deixaram um horror. Porque você sabe que tem um bicho lá, você não sabe aonde. Quando não tinha, você ficava com terror a todo momento, porque você não sabia o que podia ter lá ou o que não podia.
Much like the hallways liminal space photos often depict, that we are in an in-between. I can't help but get the feeling when looking at these photos that the past has already happened and the future is yet to occur, leaving me alone in the present. I first thought this on a bike ride I was on.
Também que meio pai essas daí de usar de wallpaper. Senão usava. Tipo, não que seja impossível usar.
I found myself viewing a neighborhood. Now, I had no idea where I was at the time or what this place even was. One minute I was on an old dirt trail and the next I was looking at infrastructure. Everything seemed so perfect in that quaint little neighborhood. Almost too perfect. You know the classic American suburban home design? This neighborhood was like that. But it seemed
Mas aqui dá uma agoniazinha porque tá muito
not a cloud in the
clean,
sky,
não tem
the
ninguém.
homes all looked identical, cars
Nossa senhora, quando a placa
sparsely
só
seen, not a single
bem
person on the
surrealista.
road. When I went over to
Acho que é
it, I
mais
couldn't
surrealista.
shake this uncanny feeling. If time itself and everyone in it had left me behind and I was the only one existing in this infinite present, I wouldn't even notice in a place like this. Hell, without enough context clues, how could I know how far this place goes on? In the narrow view of a photo of this place, no exit would be visible. Therefore, creating an out for myself in this image is much harder. We began.
Tá, só um segundo no chat que eu vou só pegar um bagulho lá e já volto rapidão.
To subconsciously think about this place as being never-ending. We see nothing beyond the horizon except more of the same, more houses, more infinite suburbia. And when we place ourselves here suspended in time, we not only fail to find an out for ourselves in the temporal sense, but also in the physical sense. I couldn't shake the feeling that no matter how long I walked along these houses, I would never reach an end. Time and space existing as one thing, keeping me trapped here forever. I think we can look at a lot of these images like that. This phenomenon can happen during the day, like my example with the neighborhood, but I think it's important to explore such a strange feeling at a time of day that creates the most liminal spaces, the night. I think the dark is one of the most essential parts of creating a creepy liminal space. Of course we have reasons to be afraid of the dark. Hell, I made an entire video about it. But it almost feels different in the context of liminal spaces. The dark exudes terror and the inability to see an incoming threat. So it isn't surprising that nighttime is one of the biggest factors in creating this altered reality feel we see in liminal spaces. It's one of the easiest ways to rip familiarity away from a familiar space, taking a place seen one time of day and contrasting it with the opposite. Imagine for a second you're in a school at night, say 3 in the morning. It is at this time of night nobody is present in school. No faculty or staff would ever have a reason to be in school at this hour. These once familiar halls now completely alien. But it isn't just the school that's empty. At this hour, the surrounding streets are likely empty. Everyone is in their homes. It's possible that the nearest person that isn't in their home is half a mile away. The silence is so prevalent, you can hear your own ears ringing. Our time as a person is characterized by other people, and when literally nothing is going on and nobody is around, we feel a sense that we are trapped. You get the feeling that everybody's gone. When I look at these images of schools at night, malls at night, empty streets at night, I get that same feeling. I get the feeling of an infinite present, that no matter how much I walk, nothing will change, and the passage of time has left me here to rot, and it is here I will stay for all eternity. Then something occurred to me. Sure, I get this feeling from liminal images at night, but I've never actually tried to be present in these images. I've never gone outside very late at night, at least not alone or outside of a car. And the times I would leave the house at 2 or 3 a.m. with someone else was usually in a car on the way to the airport. And even these times felt alien. Why would I go out alone without a car, without people? There's no reason to. So for the sake of new experiences, I tried to. These were the results. As expected, it was very lonely. I would always find myself being the only one on the street. Everything was closed, not a car on the road or a pedestrian on the sidewalk. My usual route that I bike every day being made so foreign that it was completely unrecognizable. This was the closest I'd get in real life to being the last person on Earth. Nobody is here to remember anything. In this reality of past, present, and future all existing simultaneously, it feels like nothing can happen. It's like memory is different here. Like if the world suddenly swallowed me whole, nobody would notice. This is the land of forgotten memories. When we forget something, what happens to it? No, seriously, what happens to the memories that we forget when we can no longer recall a moment? There are scientific explanations. As we age, the size of the hippocampus, the part of the brain most responsible for keeping and storing memories, loses 5% of its neurons every decade, and some of our memories are destined to go along with it. Forgetting might not seem too serious at first. For most, it's an inconvenience. Forgetting where you left your phone, forgetting the name of someone you just met. Solar Sands once claimed in his video on thalassophobia,
but a far more likely, and still considerably unpleasant way to die, is drowning.
And that's fair. Drowning is a horrible death, but one death I think is even more tragic and far more common than drowning is dementia. This next section is a bit sad and talks about dementia, so if you want to skip past all that, here's the time code. In 2017, 3,500 to 4,000 people in the US drowned. 260,000 died from dementia. More people die from forgetting than from drowning. And the fate of dementia, I'd argue, is far worse than drowning. 24.7%, or a fourth of people aged 80 to 89 will develop dementia. It is a fate far worse than death, one where your cognitive abilities slowly begin to decline. You start by just forgetting basic common objects, until those common objects become foreign. Then you eventually lose yourself. Dementia isn't just forgetting where you placed a pencil or your address. Dementia is forgetting what a pencil is used for, forgetting where you are. Familiar things become unfamiliar, and soon you cannot communicate and don't recognize anything anymore. The now famous album Everywhere at the End of Time by Leland Kirby, better known as The Caretaker, is an album about dementia. More specifically, it is a 6.5-hour audio recreation of the experience of going through dementia. The album starts happy with ballroom music with slight crackles every once in a while. The crackles become more apparent until static and music are at equilibrium. The static soon takes over, until by the end, the music is gone. The tracks deteriorate into nothing but noise. There are 6 stages to the album, much like the 6 typical symptom-related stages of dementia, each one more haunting than the last. There is an image associated with each stage, starting with what appears to be a rolled-up magazine, and continuing with what looks to be a flower pot, but you can't quite make out what it's made of. Stage 3 onwards is complete abstraction. The second saddest stage image is image 4, where we get to see the outline of a person, but no details whatsoever, symbolizing not being able to remember or even recognize your loved ones. I say second saddest because the image of stage 6 is the most striking of all. A canvas. Not one that's blank, but instead turned around, symbolizing your memories still being intact, you just can't see them, like dementia taunting you in your final moments. This entire album is what I would classify as liminal space music. Ironically, some of the last memories of patients with dementia have been of music, which makes the decision to make a musical guide through dementia that much more ironic. Everywhere at the End of Time represents confusion and disorientation. Both dementia and liminal spaces share that aspect. You can draw a surprising number of parallels between the two. The loss of familiarity they both share, the familiar becoming unfamiliar. In a way, I would classify these liminal space images of old diners, malls long forgotten, and gas stations to be physical representations of dementia. In 70 years, when Gen Z becomes an old generation and some of us inevitably procure this horrible disease, these images of broad nostalgia, accompanied by the caretaker's haunting music, might just be some of the last things we remember. Faded images of a bygone era, these places represent the fear of forgetting. These forgotten places we never had time to make mental models of at the time, but ironically might be some of the last things we ever remember. I mean, they seem perfect for it. Details so non-existent these images could apply to nearly anyone's childhood. Depictions so broad that anybody can relate to these places of the forgotten. In a way, it's a reflection of the human experience. Of us. We don't want to become homogenous with every other person that has ever existed. We want to stand out, become special, be famous and well-known years after our passings. Yet, as the sands of time continue to shift, the majority fade into the obscurity of collective forgetfulness, their names lost to the public memory. You and I likely won't be remembered for very long. It's a depressing thought, but it's true. To demonstrate this, name 10 people from the 1500s. The majority of you probably can't. Though there were thousands of people from the 1500s that were notable, the public has mostly forgotten about them, just like the masses will likely forget us in the next 500 years. It's a sobering realization, one that beckons us to question the point of doing anything. What's the point of achieving anything? Why am I even making this video if in 500 years' time I will be irrelevant? Well, I can't answer that. We are all on our own journeys on this planet we call Earth, and nobody in the far future could possibly understand everything everyone has done. One may suppose in that way we find them relatable. Some people think they lead meaningless lives, that they live day by day. We all die, so why does this even matter? This is an incorrect approach in my opinion. As relatable as we can find them sometimes, we are not liminal spaces. We are people. Sure, you might not be remembered in a few hundred years, but the things you left behind certainly will. Like a rock being thrown into a lake producing a splash. Long after the stone sinks deep into the tranquil waters, the waves it makes continue outwards, long outliving the rock that created them. Your children, their children, the people you touch now, the influence you leave behind simply by the things you do. People in the future may watch these videos of mine, and in that way I might be immortal. Liminal spaces give me hope. Hope for a future that might forget who I was, but won't forget me. Our lives are not liminal spaces. They are not places of transition, they are destinations. You can look at life like a hallway you pass through, or you can look at it like a home you reside in. The choice is up to you. So go do something meaningful. Go prove to everyone and everything in this world that your life is not a transition point. You mean something. We all do. If you've ever felt down, like you just want to disappear, like you want the earth to just swallow you whole, just know this. Your life means much more than you could ever comprehend. And though we may wander through the liminal spaces of uncertainty and doubt, let us never forget the value of our own lives. Because in the end, it is our capacity for love, for compassion, and for connection that truly defines us. These places are transitional, pointless, and forgettable in the grand scheme of things. Your life isn't, so go enjoy it, because this life isn't something you just pass through. For in the end, it is not the fleeting moments of transition that define us, but the enduring legacy of our actions and the unmistakable mark we leave upon the world.
Nem fudendo que eu tava falando todo esse tempo mutado. Nossa senhora. Que mentira. Eu falei que esse vídeo é muito bom. É para uma reflexão que geralmente a gente não traz muito no cenário brasileiro sobre o Liminal Space. Que qualquer coisa pode ser meio um Liminal Space. E que não tem bem uma fórmula, é muito sobre o que você sente. Mas é isso. Esse comentário aqui também. Que eu li esse comentário. Mas é isso, gente. Foi bom o vídeo. Valeu, valeu, gente. Valeu, YouTube.